Hello and welcome back to Comparative Vertebrate Anatomy. Today we're going to be talking about the digestive system again, but this time what we're going to do is look at a comparison of the different kinds of digestive systems that you may find among various vertebrate groups. So essentially what we're doing today is kind of who eats what and how do they do it. So when we talk about the evolution of the digestive system, now when we talked about gastrulation, we saw that that was the formation of the digestive tube. And the majority of organisms out there have some sort of rudimentary tube in which they can, or compartment, that they can digest in. But because ultimately the food has to be contained in order to be digested, right? And so food vacuoles in single cells are really the first thing that you're going to see. And sponges, for instance, will digest everything intracellularly, which means they engulf it, take it in, and they actually break it down in these food vacuoles. But as time goes on, there is the evolution of digestion going on outside of the cells. And the simplest body plans actually have a digestive sac with one opening. And the more complex the organism, kind of the more complex the digestive tube. And so you end up going from this one little sac to a whole double-ended tube, the idea of the ingestion or the mouth and then the elimination. And different organisms, as we know, have different openings for elimination. Okay, so there is a correlation between the actual digestive anatomy and the diet. Okay, and so there are three big things that you want to look at when you're looking at digestive systems. Is the food easily absorbed, or does it have to be extensively digested? And a hummingbird gets nectar, right? And so that's basically sugar water. Whereas carnivores, and especially herbivores who are eating grasses, they have to break all of this stuff down, okay? And so it turns out that the cellulose containing prey, if you will, are going to be the hardest to break down. So even though I have carnivore here, that's kind of like hummingbird versus meat eater. But when you start looking at extensive digestion, you're going to be putting herbivores at the top of the list there. Now, is there constant food supply, or is there a scattered food supply? And that's what we're talking about. Are you grazing with your herbivore? The plants don't go anywhere. You can find them wherever you want. Or do you have to like chase it and find it and all that good stuff like a carnivore would? The other thing too is that you want to talk about the high fiber food versus low fiber food. And this goes back to the easy to digest, more difficult to digest. Okay. Now, when we look at the classifications, there are three big ones, and we're probably all familiar with them already. There's the carnivore, where you have that more easily digested compared to the herbivore. Okay, now remember, the hummingbird is eating sugar water, and so that's easier to digest than the meat that the carnivore is eating. So that's why I had that on that last slide. But remember, as you start moving into harder to digest, things with lots of cellulose and high fiber are going to be harder to digest. Now, herbivores are going to be eating these plants that are hard to digest. The downside too is that they actually have a low concentration of nutrients, unlike meat, which is high protein and fat. And so there's a nice big, sort of power pack of protein and fat when you're eating meat, not so much when you're eating plants. And then omnivores have a mixed diet. They're going to have some meat, some plants, right? We are omnivores. The fetal pig that we're going to dissect is an omnivore. Okay. So digestion has different phases, and we've already talked about the mechanical and the chemical digestion that occurs once the food enters the body, and we'll go back to a little bit of that today. But what we really want to talk about are the adaptations that allow different organisms to actually exploit different resources. And the first thing that's going to be important is getting the food to the mouth, right? And so there are all kinds of digits and adaptations that allow to do that. And we have hands that can bring food to the mouth. Monkeys do, apes do, raccoons do. That's all very exciting. Maybe you can stick your head in some small place because you have a small head. Beaks, different birds have beaks that are shaped for different things. Claws can also bring food to the mouth. They can catch food. The mouth and teeth especially are important because different teeth types are going to be specialized for different food types, okay? Now, the next thing that you do once you get it to your mouth, of course, is the mastication, which is better known as chewing, okay? And you want to crush the food up so you're increasing the surface area to allow those enzymes that we talked about before, in this case in the mouth, the salivary amylase, to act on the molecules. But also as you're swallowing it, you want that larger surface area as well, because remember, everything's about surface area. Now, carnivores really need to just reduce the size of the particle to increase surface area, but herbivores actually have to chew all the time. They just continually chew their food. That's where chewing the cud comes from. They're just chewing and chewing and chewing and breaking it down. And then birds have a special thing that they do because they don't have teeth, and we'll come back to that in just a few minutes. Okay, so when you look at this animal right here, wow, that is some big, serious, pointy, cutting, tearing teeth. And this animal is a carnivore. You can tell, right, by these beautiful, big, long teeth, right? And then here, when we move over here, you have these little scissor-like teeth and these flat, grinding teeth. This guy is going to be an herbivore. And so you have the ability to cut the plant, right? So these are kind of like garden shears. And then you have the grinding, because you have to crush that up in between these flat surfaces as opposed to the pointy surfaces you saw before. And here are the pictures of what you had before. That they were looking at was a beaver, right? And that's what they do. This is a fruit bat, right? You have these kind of more pointy than you would normally see, but that's so they can crush the outside of hard fruit, right? But then you have those nice same flat grinding teeth. Here you have a deer, yeah, flat grinding teeth. Here you have a coyote, and the coyote has also these nice pointy tearing teeth. A porpoise actually has these nice little pointy peg teeth, in some ways reminiscent of reptilian teeth actually, but still pointy, pointy, pointy. And then the marmoset here is an omnivore, right? And so you can actually see there's some grinding teeth in the back, some pointy teeth in the sides here, and some cutting teeth right here in the front, the incisors, right? So by the way, it's incisors, canines, premolars, and molars. And when you think about your own incisors, they are flat, shovel-shaped for good cutting, like scissors. We have little pointy carnivore, right, the eye teeth, right, and then we have the canines, right, because that's the carnivore portion, even though we're omnivores, that's the medium portion, and they're tiny comparatively. Then we have our premolars, which are also pointy and tearing, and then we have our molars, which are grinding, just like this little marmoset here. Now sometimes animals have lost their teeth because they don't do anything with them. This is an anteater skull, and you can see that they've lost their teeth over time. And I'm not talking about individuals, I'm talking about as a species. The species does not have teeth, but they have this really ridiculously long tongue that they can stick into ant hills and, you know, stick all the ants to them and slurp them up, which is, you know, kind of fun. Okay, now the digestion and absorption portion, and these are things we've talked about: the stomach, the small intestine, the cecum, the large intestine, and colon. These are also going to be adapted to the type of food. And so animals are going to be classified also by the type of stomach that they have. And so you have your monogastrics, or non-ruminants. These have the simple stomach. And you have the ruminants, right? And they're a special type of stomach. And we're going to start with the monogastrics because that's what we are. And they're pretty simple. They come in a couple of varieties. You have the very simple. You have then the cecal digestion, which are going to be herbivores, and then you have the sacculated stomach. And we're not actually going to talk about those. This, by the way, is a mink, in case you were wondering. We're not actually going to talk about the sacculated stomach, but it is another type, and it's typically going to be for your herbivores. So let's talk about this monogastric digestive tract. Basic anatomy. It's what we've talked about when we talked about the human digestive system, or the shark digestive system, or the mud puppy digestive system, and later on we'll talk about the pig. They all have the same basic anatomy. But when you start talking about the carnivore versus the herbivore, the carnivore's digestive tract is a whole lot shorter than the herbivore because in many ways the meat and fat is easier to digest than the cellulose in the plants, okay? And so they have a lot more time. The other thing that's going to be hugely different is the cecum. Tiny cecum in carnivores and most omnivores, large cecum in herbivores. So let's talk about carnivores. You have meat-based, which means you're getting water, protein, fat, carbohydrates, vitamins, and minerals from the meat, okay? And so the carnivore GI tract is really simple. You've got a long small intestine for the digestion and absorption of fat and proteins, and you have this basic tubular structure. There's not any sort of compartments or anything like that. So when you look at this as a dog, right, you're going to have this coming in, and this is what we talked about before. So you've got all this nice short tube with the esophagus. You move into the stomach, and then you move into the small intestine. Here's the cecum. And there's not a lot of fiber, so this area is really short, and then boom, right out the back of the dog. Now, birds do not have teeth, and so insects and seeds are hard, and that makes them difficult to digest. And so birds actually do something that is very interesting. It's a behavioral adaptation as opposed to a physiological adaptation. And what they do is they swallow little small rocks, which are called gastroliths. And they are going to stay in the gizzard, which is this muscular organ that birds have. And as the gizzard churns, much like the stomach would churn, it's going to cause the stones to grind the food. So it's basically like a bird mill, if you will. And they're like millstones. And so over time, these stones, as they're grinding against the food and each other, they're going to get worn down and get small, and the bird will actually pass the stones. And so they're constantly picking up new little rocks, right? And so as they're losing rocks, gastroliths, right? And so here's the gizzard. So when they eat their food, it's going to pass through the crop, and then it's going to go into the gizzard, okay? And this is where they're going to do the grinding. And then here's the small intestine, right? And all that good stuff. Now, right, the crop is where they can hold food. Typically, they're going to hold the food here for their young, and they're going to regurgitate it so they can give it to their offspring. And here is an actual gizzard, and these are little rocks that a bird has swallowed. And here are some more examples of gastroliths that have been found in birds. Now, herbivores, right, your big herbivores that are monogastric are typically your hind gut fermenters, and they have a large intestine and cecum, okay? And they are having to digest cellulose, grain, all this good stuff in the stomach and the beginning of the small intestine, but then they have this big, what's called the hind gut, which is where they're digesting their fiber, okay? And you can see here's a horse, right? So we swallow, we go into the stomach, yay. But here you have this giant cecum, which is going to deal with the fiber because they're eating grass and all that. And then over here you have this massive colon, all right? And so this is how you're going to be dealing with all of that. And remember, the large intestine, by the way, has the, just as a side, has the flora, the bacteria and all that good stuff in it that's going to help digest. Herbivores need these biologic communities inside of them. They need these microbes to help them digest all of this plant material. And so you've got a huge amount of microbes, bacteria specifically, living in here. Now, the next kind is the ruminant. These are herbivores as well. They are called foregut fermenters, and they have an amazingly complex stomach. It has 4 different compartments, and so it's a 4-part stomach, not 4 separate stomachs, just as an aside. It has a more complex, these guys have more complex colon. They have a big cecum for storing anything that's going to be non-digestible fiber, which then is going to be eliminated with all the undesirable stuff. But here, cow, really good example. You have the food come in, right, and it's going to pass down the esophagus, but then it's going to come back into the rumen, and the rumen is like a zoo. There are microbes, there are different kinds. There are going to be protozoa, there are going to be bacteria, lots and lots and lots of bacteria, all kinds of little single-celled guys in there that are doing their stuff. And so they are highly populated. This is one of the reasons, by the way, that they're also highly flatulent, is because they have all sorts of digestion that's going on in their digestive system that's not done by them. So they're going to come through here, right, and they move into the second portion, which is the reticulum, okay? And then at this point, they're going to regurgitate this food and just chew it, right? Chew, 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 chewing the cud. And then it's going to come back into the third part of the stomach, the omasum, and then it's going to move into the abomasum, and it's going to go right into the intestine and then out. But this is where we're going to be dealing with any proteins, fats that are going to be in here, and then your fiber, right? Vitamins and minerals are going to be in the previous chambers, okay? But they have to work really hard to get their stuff. So they forage rapidly, they eat a lot of food, and one of the ideas about this is that they can eat a lot of food, and then they can go hide and just chew it, right? So they regurgitate it, more or less, chew it, chew it, chew it, swallow it. And then they regurgitate more of the stuff they've eaten, chew it, chew it, chew it, swallow it, okay? And so that is possibly a way to avoid predation, but also it's partly to deal with the massive amounts of cellulose. Now, ruminants don't actually secrete amylase in their saliva because it's the bacteria and protozoa in the rumen that I was talking about and in the reticulum that break all of this stuff down. Okay, and so it's the microorganisms that are going to be producing the molecules that these guys are going to need to be converted into energy instead of the carbohydrates that you break down with the amylase. And so it's a different process, same idea, but different process. Okay, and then here are just some examples of, here's the shark stomach, which we're familiar with, Necturus, that's our friend the mud puppy, and then here's the pig, which looks remarkably similar to the human. All right, so that's it for a little comparative digestion. If you have any questions, please let me know next time I see you, and thanks for listening.